A local university reports now raised the alarm on a Poland-based news outfit aggregating mis- and disinformation and false narratives about South Africa, all at the zenith of worsening US-SA trade relations.
It's part of a network. It's part of a content creator network which has strong ties to South Africa's right wing, but it's also part of a financial and venture capitalist network that is fascinating. So on the Polish side, Thomson's own firm has been directly linked to state-funded campaigns, and those are worth millions of rand. And on the US side, it operates under a tax-exempt non-profit. It runs under a slogan, mainstream media is dead, we're building what's next. But, they still are tapping into what looks like a mainstream media model.
News 24's disinformation desk editor Andrew Thompson delivers the findings of Stellenbosch University's deep dive on Visagrad 24 next. Later in the show, News 24 ventures down a Zamazama's mine shaft. And finally, the lead is skibbity enough to end off with Cambridge Dictionary's new words.
To know when the next episode drops, hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons on our YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast channels.
Got anything on your mind? Send us a voice note to 072 562 3179. My name's Graham Robenheimer. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. A new report put out by a research centre at Stellenbosch University has now exposed a Poland-based news group called Visagrad 24 for amplifying the views of alt-right commentators and their false narratives and or mistruths about what's happening in South Africa today. Now, this report is authored by the University Centre for Information Integrity in Africa, has also drawn links between Visagrad 24 and Polish government funding, and is allegedly enjoying US tax-exempt status as well. Now, the man at the center of its operations is founder Stefan Thomson, who's in the past brushed shoulders with known local political YouTuber Willem Petzer, as well as Mr. Twatterbaas himself, Sebastian Jooste. Now, joining us in our Cape Town studio to shed more detail on this report specifically is our News 24 disinformation desk editor, Andrew Thompson. Andrew, thanks so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, and welcome to The Lead.
Thanks, Graham. Good to be here.
Yeah, we haven't chatted in a while. It's lovely to have you back. You've been jetting all over across Europe, and I've been a little bit jello about that. Let's begin with this, right? And I think it's important that we sort of disclaim from the outset that a lot of these findings have been coming from this specific report. You've interpreted what's in the report to come out in an article that's still fairly trending on the front page of News 24 after the coming out over the weekend, and that's entitled "Report Links South African Far-Right Network to Poland Back to US Shielded Misinformation Site." And there's been a lot of commentary around it. Let's begin with this, a rather simple question, but what is Visagrad 24?
Yeah, it was an amazing report that came out of the Centre for Information Integrity in Africa, and I think they spent a lot of time and had a huge team working on this. And so, as you say, essentially we were just reporting on their findings, and many of those findings are fascinating, particularly in light of disinformation and the current situation that we're currently in. Visagrad 24 is well known to many readers and listeners of News 24. It has initially started as a Polish website and very strong X account that ultimately calls itself a news aggregator. So rather than producing news directly themselves, they kind of styled themselves as collecting different voices from around the world. And as you said, it was founded by a guy called Stefan Thomson, who has very strong South African roots, and he's not really shied away from public attention. And in many interviews, he's described himself as operating a PR company. He's described his business as not news, not a news outlet, and yet he's very quick to share very strong views and opinions, many of them quite swayed towards one side or the other. And I think that's kind of the foundation of the whole empire that he's slowly building around news aggregation, disinformation, misinformation, and an incredibly strong social media presence that in many ways, as we will discuss, is outperforming legacy news social media.
This is, as I'm seeing now on their X bio at the moment, just to add to the conversation, Andrew, Visegrad24 has a gold tick on X, formerly known as Twitter. We'll get to that in a second because I think that is the secret recipe in terms of its reach across the globe. It's self-styled as an aggregating and curating news, politics, and current affairs. That's basically the bio. It's got 1.4 million followers. It's only joined in January 2020. And it's been verified, as I see, according to the gold tick, that it has since March 2023. I want to get to the gold tick quite early off the bat. It's a big game changer if you can afford it on X, because that means what? Your posts are going to be reaching all corners.
Absolutely. So what that tick gets you is it costs in South African money about 180,000 Rand a year.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to pay for verification on a social media platform. The kicker with that is if you can afford that fee, it gets you more than that back in advertising spend. And you can then use that advertising spend to amplify your views. That plus the overall narrative of what many people call rage baiting, content that's stripped of context, very sort of outrage-centered content. So anti-immigrant, anti-Islam, pro-Israel, white victimhood type narratives combine really well with this amplification on a platform like X, which has caught the attention and apparent interests of its founder or its takeover holder, Elon Musk, who has also further amplified these stories. And that really has been central to their rise in prominence in certain social media corners.
Right. So from a global perspective, before we get to the South African side of things, what are some of the sort of main sort of newsy current events that they're sort of touching on? I can't imagine that the Middle East conflict is too far off.
Yeah, so Stefan Thompson's taken a very open line around his own internal preferences and objectives, and so he says that he is openly in support of Israel in the Israel-Hamas conflict. So that's been a key one. The Russia-Ukraine war has also been a very big driver of traffic for him. He's openly taken stances in the war. He's interviews made it very clear where his allegiances lie. And in defending his non sort of objective approach, he's saying that he doesn't see it as his website as journalism. He sees there's no need to be objective. And so that's the general narrative of the website. It's a right-leaning, quite direct, quite abrupt, rage-baiting website in many regards. But the topics vary. There's content from animal conservation right through to global conflicts. And the core, which we'll get to, is a very strong South African influence and link.
Right. In other words, as we've discussed up until this point, a tweet that's coming from this particular account, which has the gold tick, it's going to get all the rocket fuel it needs to basically get into the main algorithm of X as we know it, right?
Absolutely. It's got all the ingredients to make it a really powerful platform, and whether that's built on objectivity or integrity, or whether it's built on paid and sort of social amplification is really the debate. And the current news climate that we're living in is that your news doesn't have to necessarily be true or unbiased in order for it to go viral as fact.
Right. Andrew, you've expertly in this report just took one example, right, as per the Stellenbosch University Centre's findings, to illustrate more closer to home ultimately what, this account is capable of, if you will, in a practical sense. Right after Donald Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa as presidents in the White House, we all saw it on television and all had our own views. There came this very new popular way of disbursing news or views on X. It's a thread, so somebody will post one particular sort of subject, and then you can go through that like on Reddit and be able to understand a lot more about a particular subject. That's become really popular on X, I'd say, in the past couple of 2 or 3 years. And what was this one specifically about, and what did you uncover in terms of its findings and what it says to the report's findings?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting that despite previously being quite an internationally focused website, it spun a lot towards the farm attacks and the narrative of white genocide in South Africa that reached the White House. And in that thread that you're talking about, we looked at it, and Sina from Stellenbosch University looked at it. And there were several examples on the X feed that show classic examples of mis or disinformation. In the case of the tweet that you're talking about, the thread was focused on Trump's claim in the White House to Ramaphosa that there was an ongoing potential white genocide and white farmers were being directly attacked. Visegrad 24 put out a tweet or an X post immediately after that saying, here are examples that Trump was referring to that happened in South Africa in the last 5 months. And one of those tweets was directly from a Citizen newspaper article that actually came out 7 years ago to a non-farming family. And I think the most telling aspect of that is the date on that news article was cropped. So there was no way as a casual user to see that this incident that they were reporting as having happened in the last 5 months actually happened 7 years ago. Now, that's not to excuse the attack and not to make light of that.
100%.
It's absolutely looks like a deeply traumatic event, and all the reporting on it expressed that. But to my mind, it then undermines the trauma that man and his family went through by using this to suit a narrative that apparently happened in the last 5 months. And it shows the thread of how one company, Poland-based, can get a tweet about South Africa into the hands of a sitting president in the United States to inform global politics and global decisions that objectively is not with any basis. And that's one example of several of either distorting narratives or playing towards a very specific narrative that have very real consequences for South Africa and for individuals on the ground.
Right. You've put it so excellently that it actually undermines the truthfulness of what exactly happened in that particular very sad incident, right? And a lot of the time that the people who are commenting on efforts to debunk disinformation, misinformation, whatever, sometimes don't understand what it means to the people who are actually involved in the story, whether they or not they gave their go-to or green light for, factual circumstances of their experience to be changed in a way that fits another narrative, which is not okay, right? We often forget about that, I think.
I agree. And I think it also, curiously, when these realities come to light, it undermines the message that the person who's putting out that tweet or that piece of misinformation actually wants to prove. So in this case, why weren't there cases that were more relevant that did happen within the last 5 months? Why did the people who are putting out this information have to dig 7 years into the archives? And in that specific case, the report doesn't go into the exact details of this, but it appears as if they had simply lifted that piece of mis or disinformation, depending on who doctored it. They'd lifted that from a Facebook group that was also doing a very similar thing. And that is really, this kind of ongoing thread of disinformation or misinformation, that one person put it on a Facebook group with a very partisan approach, and someone else just went and picked it up without fact-checking it, retweeted it as fact, and that can then land in the hands of a sitting president. And that's the information age that we're living in.
How many examples similar to this does the Centre's report point to?
I don't have a full tally of it. They highlighted a few, and I would encourage anyone to go and read all the.
It's quite a lengthy report, right?
It's all of 8,000 words that we had to sit through and have a look through. So it's very comprehensive, and much of it doesn't actually focus specifically on the South African narrative. It focuses more on because the South African side of this is fairly well known, and there have been other stories of theirs widely debunked as well. But how that fits into the global sort of narrative of disinformation and misinformation in the current climate is really interesting, especially with the foreign links.
You're You're listening to the latest edition of The Lead on News 24 with Graham Rowenheimer. If you've got an opinion on what you've heard so far, drop us a short voice note on our WhatsApp hotline. That's 072 562 3179.
You're listening to The Lead with myself, host Graham Robe, and I'm in conversation with our News 24 Disinformation Desk editor, Andrew Thompson, about this report that goes deep into the operations of Visegrad 24. Okay, let's find out a little bit more about Visegrad 24. You've already alluded to the fact that Stefan Thompson, who is the founder of this particular news aggregator, has some South African links, and pictures have since emerged of him with some local content producers, one of which very questionable in terms of their output and has already been highlighted on News 24. Of course, the infamous Twatterboss, which we got a lot of flack for exposing, but there's very good reasons why Twatterboss's work was exposed, because it was fueling many of these mistruths around the time that we were reaching towards this climate point with the US. Now we're sitting with Trump tariffs. I'm not saying that was the direct result of it, but the souring of relations has been a consequence of these actions. Yes, Thompson, there's photographic evidence that he's met with both Twatterboss as well as other content creators. Is that right?
That's right. And the report goes into all of those details and uncovered a lot of archive posts and many photographs and other details that have been deleted. And I think that's often the internet doesn't forget stuff. You can delete a tweet, but it exists in archives and people save it. So the report found a photograph of Thompson and Jooste posing for a picture before his identity was revealed. That was deleted quite quickly, but saved by other social media users. There's no evidence that we could see of Jooste actually contributing or participating in the website. So that, at the moment, seems to be more social, ideological connection. But the other YouTuber who has very strong and very open connections to Thompson and to Visegrad 24 is Willem Petzer, who we frequently checked his videos and his content online and debunked it quite easily with clear facts. The most recent one was a claim that witchcraft is being taught as a subject at South African universities alongside subjects like physics. And the evidence, and actually in response to the interview, to the report, Petzer said, it's clear as day there was a guest lecture about witchcraft, and we fact checked that, and it's without foundation. The UFS, University of Free State, made very clear that it was an open lecture about African healing and traditional healers. So Petzer has produced a lot of content that aligns very closely with Visegrad 24, and the two, Thompson and Petzer, describe each other as dear friends. When Thompson comes out to South Africa, they frequently go on hunting trips together. They've been to the Ngorongoro crater. They look like close friends. And Petzer's contributed a few stories to Thompson's platforms. And one that really jumped out to me was an article that basically kind of ties into the whole narrative of this, which focuses on what the website calls a genocide watch. And to me it's interesting because often the modus operandi is that these groups will lead up to everything but say that there's a white genocide happening in South Africa. And to be clear, no one in this article or on the website says that it is happening. But in the article about Genocide Watch, it makes it very alarmist. And one of the claims that they say is South Africa's at stage 6 of genocide. And
sure,
that is scary in itself if you're just seeing that out of context. The context,
and obviously it's got sorry to cut you short, like a bit of like a load shedding ESCOM negative connotation to it, whatever, when you hear stage 6,
Exactly, yeah. And the context of that is that the founder has actually actively distanced himself from white genocide and using it as a white genocide tool to measure white genocide. And there's a lot of sort of saying everything but in order to get people riled up and alarmed. And if I was just clicking through a website without knowledge of South Africa, and I saw that we were on stage 6 of a white genocide, I had no context of that, I would be concerned.
100%.
And I suppose the rebuttal is that we should be concerned, but it's a scale without justification, and that's classic misinformation of we're going to scare you, but we're not really going to give you the full facts.
Right. So we've established the South African connection side of things. There's clear lines drawn, and a clear friendship that has blossomed between, somebody who's in charge of a news aggregator site out of Poland and a local content creator. How does this aggregator work? The Centre's report has gone a little bit further to really drill down into what the foundations of an outfit like this might look like, going as far as to draw links of Polish state government funding and allegedly enjoying tax-exempt status over in the United States, about the establishment of some foundational group in Pennsylvania. It's really far flung and very interesting and curious.
There's a really interesting chart that we published with the article that came out of the report that details specifically all these links and how it all plays into a network of key players. Absolutely. One of the key things that the report alleges is that through the PR side of things, the company was able to generate very high funds from ultimately Polish-linked sources, many of them seemingly within government. That's an indirect fund generation scheme, it seems. That then ties to a Polish-American investor who has registered a non-profit that then allows tax exemption, and their sole goal with that, and it says it very clearly on their website, is to reject mainstream media. We're building the next form of media. But what this means is it can then go through unchecked, it can raise funds, it doesn't have the same guardrails that traditional media has in terms of being able to tell objective news and make clear your funding and all of your background and all the platforms that you're using.
Right. And then, immediately when I sort of started reading about Visegrad 24, I was like, the 24 thing, we work for News 24 and, we deal with subjects, different things all the time. So, as an entry point, I was really like, hey, what's this all about? Is it a local thing? News 24 obviously has its critics and detractors, and we get a lot of flack on certain fronts. Sometimes people don't like the truth, and that's okay. They can interpret what they like. We try and set the record straight based on what we know. And I thought, very interestingly, Visegrad 24 leans on the colors and stylings of, the look and feel of the particular News 24 logo to give it some brevity, it would seem.
It's fascinating to me that the logo echoes very closely that of News 24's, and I haven't yet heard a justification for that, but it's
a slightly darker blue, slightly different shade of red, still using 24, but the blues and the reds all in the same spaces.
And it intrigues me mostly from an aspect of they've worked very hard to present themselves, even though this report shows it's not true, as a grassroots, donor-funded, open source journalism. And why then would there be this direct association with News 24's logo and
we're the mainstream?
And so it seems at odds with the overall idea, and they're skirting two sides of things. Visegrad doesn't openly say that they bias on their website, but Thompson then goes on an interview with the Jerusalem Post and says that objectivity is a waste of time. And so it's either they're figuring it out as they go, or there's some bigger strategy that I'm not aware of here. But it seems to me that the importance of legacy or mainstream media, which are often used as slurs in this circle, are still very important to the climate and to the landscape. And I think the more the more facts and fact checking that goes into stuff, it kind of brings a lot of this information out, and the report details a lot of that stuff. That's actually fascinating to look at the contradictions in their public messaging and in their private backing.
Right. Everything we've heard thus far, all the context of all of this, how would you bring it all together in one nice, neat bow, if you will, and wrap it all up for us, Andrew?
I think the new Stellenbosch report really shows that Vidagrad 24 isn't some crowd-funded independent project, fighting for the sort of the unspoken voices on the ground. And it's part of a network. It's part of a content creator network which has strong ties to South Africa's right wing, but it's also part of a financial and venture capitalist network that is fascinating. So on the Polish side, Thompson's own firm has been directly linked to state-funded campaigns, and those are worth millions of rand. And on the US side, it operates under a tax-exempt non-profit. It runs under a slogan, mainstream media is dead, we're building what's next. But, they still are tapping into what looks like a mainstream media model. And really, I suppose if we're going to sum it up, the report shows clearly how donations have been collected globally, avoiding political oversight, avoiding tax that would be applied to a normal business by virtue of going through a non-profit setup. And I'd say, put simply, the report argues that Visagrad's reach is propped up by Polish money, sheltered by the US system, and presenting itself as this grassroots kind of voice of the people, and yet having significant impact with stories that are often not watertight and don't hold veracity to the true facts of scenarios.
But we had this chat beforehand, if we had to take all of the optics and filters out of the equation, so, all of the amplification of mis and disinformation about South African narratives, if we had to put aside any views being espoused around the conflict in the Middle East, this is still a really great example of where we're heading towards. Right? It's a little scary that and great at a certain perspective that, more people get to have voices across the globe and freedom of speech. That is fantastic. But with great power comes great responsibility. And this is such an interesting example, a case study, if you will, I'm sure, Andrew, you and I are going to have more conversations like this in future in the next 10 to 20 years, right?
Yeah, I think it speaks to a shifting landscape of media in the world. And I think we're in an age where divisive, rage-baiting stories get a lot of traction. And if you can amplify that with support from founders of social media companies and with paid placements and with disenfranchised or frustrated or scared people around the world, those narratives are spreading, and they're spreading really fast and really quickly. And I think the ultimate consequence of that is dis or misinformation can land up in the hands of powerful people who then treat it as fact. And they use that then to inform public policy or have direct impacts on South Africa. And we're seeing it playing out right now, that a lot of policies that are directly targeting South Africa are off the back of sources or information that hold very little water or very little veracity. And that's unfortunately the future of one aspect of media in the current landscape.
Just publicizing the findings, a lot of it obviously recontextualized or contextualized out of what the report of the Stellenbosch University has put out. Merely putting that article out on the front page of News 24, it's not been without its flack. And that's been par for the course for the News 24 disinformation desk. I think a lot of the time these guys just see Andrew Thompson and they start, getting really upset. So I do not envy you on that front. But this it's not been any different.
No.
People don't like the information that's come out of this particular report, and it's not even something that has been original research authored by you, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I want to reiterate that this is phenomenal work that came out of the Stellenbosch University's division there, and I think the only way through it is dialogue. So I'm very open to feedback and communication, and oftentimes some of the most important fact checks that we've done across the spectrum have come out of critiques and comments or suggestions from people who have openly criticized me as well. And I'm very open to that. And I think the only way we're really going to push through a disinformation landscape is if we actually all looked objectively together and go, you've got a point or you don't have a point, let's find the facts and let's work together on this, rather than this kind of narrative of one person is constantly doing wrong. And so, yeah, it's a fascinating crossroads that we're at the moment. And I'm very open to feedback, and if anyone has stuff that they want fact-checked or they believe is fake news or disinformation, our email address is widely published, and we'll take it and we'll look into it. There's certainly no specific narrative or target that we are focusing on with this.
Those pesky neighborhood WhatsApp groups, are always such a great treasure trove, Andrew. And yet, you still, as any journalist would, put out a request for comment from those who are named in the story. And did you have any luck there?
Yeah, so we reached out to all the people who were named, as good journalistic ethics do, and no, we got nothing by the deadlines, which we gave everyone well over 24 hours to respond to the allegations in the report. To be clear, not our allegations, but the allegations in the report. Yeah, apart from a call from a lawyer and an angry email response saying, good luck with your lies, we didn't get any initial responses. We have subsequently had some responses from Willem Petzer, which we will update in the story, and we're happy to do that. That's part of the process, is to give people right of reply to all the comments, and that's how journalism works.
100%. And then lastly, out of the report itself, you say it's quite lengthy, of course, there's a lot to it. Does it make any strong recommendations? A lot of the time the research will go as far as saying, perhaps more research is needed. Or it will prescribe something that will perhaps take, such research further in future.
I think the core takeaway and the core sort of ending to it is a lot more work needs to be done. And a lot more investigation needs to be done. So this really is just the beginning of these sorts of investigations. And it appears as increasingly there are organizations with real credibility eager to get to the bottom of funding models, of news networks, of influencer models. And so, yeah, I think the key takeaway with this is that this is really just the beginning of real fact-checking and ensuring accountability, even for companies that don't fall in line with a typical quote-unquote mainstream media model.
And the one-man band that is the News 24 Disinformation Desk. Putting all of this aside, anything hot on off the press due to come out without giving away too much, Andrew?
Always. The key thing is a lot of this is a moving target. And so we've covered a huge range of topics from fact-checking Julius Malema to Fikile Mbalula to, to, as you say, your neighborhood watch groups. And it varies from the semi-light-hearted, trivial stuff to this, which is heavy, and it's controversial, and it comes with a lot of pushback on both sides. So I'd encourage people to go have a look. Our email address is at the bottom of every story, and you're welcome to pop us an email if you've encountered information that you believe is worthy of a fact check.
Right. You have a huge support in myself, Andrew. Thanks so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. And that is Report links South Africa far-right network to Poland-backed US-shielded misinformation site. Is many of the findings come out of that Stellenbosch University report Andrew's alluded to in that particular report on News 24. Thanks so much, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Trending topic.
To our trending topic now, and we often hear about their exploits in the headlines, but this time News 24's journalist Rosetta Msamango followed a group of Zama-Zamas down an undisclosed, disused mineshaft east of Johannesburg to better understand the conditions they put themselves under. That full report is now up on our YouTube channel. Meanwhile, News 24's Tankiso Maketo reports that just last month, private security guards caught several illegal miners in the Ekurhuleni region, among them some 24 children under the age of 16. some as young as 11. Now, according to sources, only one of the children in this particular case was South African. The others, well, Zimbabweans and Mozambicans, sent to South Africa, it's understood, in search of a better life. Now, for more, subscribe to News 24 and read Tankiso's piece inside a Zama Zama mine, child labor, armed gangs, and slippery shafts.
Buying a car? Let driving with J9 steer you right.
The reason why I wanted you in today is because I want to talk about car sales. You were in that space for a few years as a salesman.
News 24's motoring podcast, hosted by Janine van der Post, delivers sharp car advice, expert test drives.
Nowadays, when somebody, for the most part, when somebody walks into a dealership, they know sometimes more about the car than the salesperson does because of the access to information.
Yeah.
The latest trends and motorsport interviews, all in one smooth ride.
But I mean, these are basic questions that people really need to know. And I think at the end of the day, you just really need to do your homework.
Catch Driving with J9 on News 24 or wherever you get your podcasts. And
finally, Cambridge Dictionaries added some 6,000 new words, including skibbity, delulu, and tradwife. Well, just a caveat from this millennial, these are not words used by me. Instead, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are to blame here, lol. By the way, that's laugh out loud. Whatever. Skibbity, Cambridge says, was difficult to define as a word. Think of it like cool, if you will, or kith. It may or may not be skibbity, a so-called brain rot term. It's nonsensical. That's all you really need to know. Delulu, well, it speaks for itself. You're delusional for using the word skibbity. And lastly, tradwife. Well, that's a little bit more controversial as it's used online among certain circles that embrace traditional gender roles. Cambridge says it only adds words it feels has true staying power in the internet sense of things. Well, another term added is quote-unquote forever chemical. No, not a new grunge band. It's a rather dystopian way of describing the accumulation of hot gases causing global warming. Let me skibbity my way out of this segment. Oh, wait, I didn't use that properly. Damn millennials. Well, from Delulu to Visegrad 24, who knew the Internet of Things would have us rubbing our temples so furiously? On this day in history, the 18th of August 1964, South Africa was officially banned from the Olympic Games. Now, in late 1963, the International Olympic Committee decided in Baden, Germany, that South Africa would have to eliminate racial discrimination in sport before December 1963, or the country would not be permitted to send a team to the 64 Olympic Games in Tokyo. Though the deadline was later extended to allow South Africa some more time, the government at the time was not prepared to permit multiracial sport. As a result, the IOC did not invite South Africa to the Olympic Games in Tokyo. This was a heavy blow for South African sporting circles and supporters. Following later Prime Minister Forster's relaxed sports policy, a committee of the IOC had visited South Africa in September 1967 to examine things. The committee presented a favorable report and stated that South Africa had undertaken to send a multiracial team selected on merit to the next Olympic Games. On strength of this report, South Africa was invited to the 68 Games in Mexico, but this elicited such sharp protests from African countries who threatened to withdraw if South Africa had participated that the IOC was obliged to withdraw its invitation. The ban was only lifted prior to the 1992 Olympic Games in Barcelona, when the international community became convinced that South Africa was irrevocably on the road to political transformation and democracy. That On This Day in History tidbit, courtesy of South African History Online. Well, anything top of your mind in today's edition? Well, you can send us a voice note to 072-562-3179 and we'll play those out in our next edition. Don't worry, I'll bring up the topic again at the end of the next edition's show, so be look out for that. Meanwhile, you can hit follow, like, subscribe. That way you can stay notified about the lead. And until then, my name's Graham Robbenheimer, and so long as there's news, we'll have the lead.